All right, so good evening. Thanks to those of you who are joining live and those of you who are watching the recording. I appreciate you taking the time. Welcome to Holding Government Accountable, our weekly workshop. My name is Dr. Josh Franco, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Cuyamaca College. Let's go ahead and dive right in. So recall that this workshop is a series that's focused on how individuals inside and outside of government can hold it accountable to the Constitution, federal and state laws, and regulations. We'll have 16 workshops throughout this term, and they're held every Wednesday from 7:30 to 8 via Zoom. For the past 6 weeks, we talked about a range of topics: student power, local government, working and living in Sacramento or DC, working particularly in the state capitol, California state boards and commissions, and the Congress, also known as the Hill. Today, we'll be talking about what? There's a manual? Yes, we are. I'm quite excited about this. All right, let's jump right in. So our learning objectives with our workshop for today, what there's a manual, is the following. First is to explain the U.S. government manual. Secondly is to identify the major sections of the manual. And then lastly is to describe how the manual can be used to hold the government accountable. So first, what is this U.S. government manual I'm talking about? Well, the U.S. government manual was published initially as a loose leaf notebook, and its pages held in place by 3 metal rings. For over 8 decades, this New Deal era publication had been the official handbook of the federal government, a regularly updated special edition of the Federal Register. It also includes leadership tables and describes agency activities and programs of the executive, judicial, and legislative branches of government, as well as activities and programs of quasi-official agencies and international organizations in which the United States participates as a member. So that's our manual, a handbook. And they're like, well, what are you talking about? Let's go take a look. So we go to usgovernmentmanual.gov, and I'll post a link in the chat just so we have a record of that. I'm going to go ahead and have this read to us because it's a lot of text. So I'm going to stop it there because it's just a very long list of topics that are covered. But this U.S. government manual, the reason I like to talk about this, one, because I'm a political nerd, that's for sure. Number two is I never knew about this when I was a student at community college or at the university. And so one of the first things that I came across when I started working in Congress, right? So it's like we're on a campaign trail. We're doing this stuff. Tuesday night, we win. Wednesday night, Myra and I are flying back to DC. Thursday morning, we're in the nation's capital, and we go to the front door of the office, and the clerk staff is like, "Oh, you're the new ones. Here you go." We walk in and we're like, "What do we do?" My first reaction was, "We got to inventory everything in the office because they clean it out. Like when there's a new member of Congress come in, it's all clear. There's nothing in there." I was like, what do we do? What do we do? So as I'm going through like the cabinets and the drawers and the computer desk, somebody left a manual from the prior congresswoman's staff, like a book. I still have it somewhere in my archive. It was a book. I was like, what is this? U.S. government manual. I start flipping through. I'm like, what? This exists? I was just like, wait, let me have that emoji. I know there's emoji here for this. I have to show this because I have to realize you learn about government in class. You learn about politics from the news and from articles. You talk about it with your classmates and your professor. But like there's a handbook out there that kind of just explains all this. So I was just like, OMG. Like, wow, this is wild. One of the sad things is that they don't print it anymore. At least when I was there, they did. That was 15, a little under, 12, 13 years ago. So Now it's online. So here's our like resources: Declaration of Independence, Constitution, organizational chart. So we'll talk about this a little bit more. So that's where you can find the manual online now. It's not in print anymore. So what are some major sections of the manual? Like I just mentioned, Declaration of Independence, Constitution, organizational chart of the US government. I was like, what? There's a chart? Yeah. History of organizational changes. I was like, what? Board, commissions, and committees, other international organizations, selected bilateral organizations, agency acronyms and initialisms, links to external websites, contact info, and archives of US government manuals. So this is a major organization of them. So as an example, we're going to take a look at 3 of these sections: organizational chart, history of agency organizational changes, and boards and commissions. So the first thing is this organizational chart. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Like, how do we organize stuff? The Constitution, the different branches of government, and obviously the executive branch is the largest one, at least bureaucratically. So it has all these extra boxes underneath it. And then even from there, like these independent establishments and government corporations. And when I saw this, I was like, wow. And having now going to be working in the legislative branch, I'm like, we get to oversee all of this. I was like, this is so much fun. It was just awesome. Second section is history of organizational changes. I'm going to go ahead and back to the website. We'll click on that link, history of agency organizational changes. Post the link in the chat for posterity. And we'll just zoom in here. So let's say, for example, we just click on M. And in this case, the Office of Management, Budget and Evaluation, established within the Department of Energy pursuant to conference report number 017-258, which means conference report from the 107th Congress, and it was the 258th conference report on HR 211, which is House of Representatives Bill 2311, Energy and Water Development Appropriations Acts of 2002, abolished by memorandum of July 28, 2005 of the Secretary of Energy, and various functions transferred within the Department of Energy to the Office of Management, Office of Chief Financial Officer, and Office of Human Capital Management. So if you want to know kind of what happens to an organization, you kind of take a look here. I'm going to go and pull one up because I'm familiar with this one, given what happened when I worked in Congress. The Minerals Management Service, MMS, or M&Ms. So this was established in January 19th, 1982 by secretarial order, renamed as the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, Regulation, and Enforcement on June 18th, 2010 by secretarial order 3302, and then reorganized into the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement by secretarial order 3299 on May 19th, 2010. Now, you might be asking, so why is that interesting, Dr. Franco? I'll tell you why. Because that organization was found to be basically doing really bad things. And the Congress found out, and the Congress was like, we're gonna update how the Department of Interior operates. And conversations back and forth, hearings, this and that. And then what ended up happening was, well, the Congress did make some legal changes, but the Secretary of Energy, or excuse me, Secretary of the Interior was like, I'll just take care of this. I'm going to issue a secretarial order that changes this organization. So these changes really matter. And this document just documents all that stuff. Now, it doesn't give you the background, the politics, or what's going on at the time. It just like states it as a matter of fact. So this is pretty cool. The next section I want to share. So we have that history. This last one, or this third one, is board, commissions, and committees. So let's go ahead and go back to the manual, and we'll click on boards, commissions, and committees. And let's zoom in. So this is a list of federal boards, commissions, councils not listed elsewhere in the manual, which were established by congressional or presidential action, whose functions are not strictly limited to the internal operations of a parent department or agency, and which are authorized to publish documents in the Federal Register. While the editors have attempted to compile a complete and accurate listing, suggestions for improving coverage to this guide are welcome. Please call or email Federal Register. So a couple of things, I'll just kind of pull them off the top. The Citizen Stamp Advisory Committee. You're like, what? Stamps? Let's take a look. So when I was a child, I did collect stamps. I don't know even how I came across that process, but I did. So the Citizen Stamp Advisory Committee is appointed by the Postmaster General. This group selects subjects for recommendation as future stamp issues made with all postal customers in mind, including stamp collectors. And you're like, what? There's a federal committee that does this? Yes, there is. And let's take a look at who our members are. 13 people, different folks. I'm like, process. How do they decide stuff? So they carefully consider the criteria for appropriate stamp subjects. They submit proposals in writing to the U.S. mail, include current historical information, mail your suggestion to this. Please note, due to limited time required, ideas for stamp subjects should be received at least three or more years prior to their issuance. It's like, I got an idea for a stamp in 2025 because it's 2022 and you have to issue stuff in advance. It says, as of January 28th, no living persons will be honored on a stamp. So y'all, people got to pass away before we honor them on a stamp. And no credit is given or compensation is given for submission of a stamp subject. So the question I would ask you is like, what would be a stamp subject you'd want covered? And in my mind, I'm like, community colleges. We should have stamps for community colleges, like historical stamps, like this is how old the campus is or when it was founded or kind of some nice backdrop. That'd be awesome. So it's an idea. I think I'll bring it up to my college president and I'll bring it up to the system office, see what they think. So that's one example of a border commission. Let's go back to our manual. Let's scroll down a little bit more. Cool. National Park Foundation. Let's check this out. You're like, what's a national park? We know what a national park is. Yosemite, Death Valley, Joshua Tree, Sequoia Kings, Grand Canyon is probably the most common one for folks here in San Diego. Cabrillo National Monument over on Point Loma Peninsula also would fall under this system. But you're like, the National Park Foundation, what do they do? Well, let's check them out about this foundation. So they are an organization here. They're the official charitable partner of the National Park Service with the goal of enriching the national parks experience for people. And it was chartered by Congress in 1967, and it grew out of the legacy of protecting the parks. There's a board of directors, there's a newsroom. So let's go and check out who's on the board. Whole bunch of good people here. Honorable Deb Haaland, who's the Secretary of the Department of Interior. Charles Sams, Secretary of the board, and then Director of the National Park Service, and a whole bunch of other folks. So I know about this group because when I worked in Congress, my employer, Congressman Garamendi, he served on the House Committee on Natural Resources that has oversight over the National Park Service. And so we met with this group to learn more about it. So yeah, I mean, like there's boards and commissions and they do stuff on behalf of the government or behalf of some entity of the government. So keep that in mind. Like as you're like saying, oh, government's complicated. How can I get involved? Well, if you, for example, care about stamps, maybe that's the place. Another example, National Council on Disability. Say you have a disability and you feel like there needs to be greater advocacy and efforts to address the disabled community. Well, you click on their website. It's an independent federal agency committed to disability policy leadership since 1978. And you might be asking, like, how can I get involved? What can I read? Well, let's check out this progress reports. So progress report, the impact of COVID on people with disabilities. Just published a few months ago. So we want to see the whole document. 260 pages about how COVID has impacted these individuals. A lot of stuff. Great information is being produced out there by these boards and commissions. So I highly recommend check them out. With that, one additional thing I want to highlight that isn't on the slides is, being able to just see kind of like the international organizations that are out there. So for example, this is a listing of international orgs. We're going to click on, regional organizations that exist, the Antarctic Treaty System, the Arctic Council, the Commission for Labor Cooperation, NATO Parliamentary Assembly, which is having a heightened importance now given the invasion of Ukraine by the Russian military forces, and just a whole bunch of other things and organizations that the U.S. is involved in or a member of. I always like pointing out the Whaling Commission. Where's it at? I just saw it. International Whaling Commission. Sad face. Where's that? Whaling. There it is. The other one I like to point out too is the tuna. You're like, what tuna? What tuna? I'm like, yes, there is an international commission on the conservation of Atlantic tunas. I'm going to show this to you guys because people are like, what? I'm like, yes, tuna. Fish of the sea, the cans. I regularly consume that. My son's always interested in it. And he's brought up the dolphin issue because in one of his children's book, it shows how dolphins were being netted by fishermen who are seeking tuna. And then obviously the dolphin dies. So he asked me about that. And I was like, yeah, there is a documentary that kind of blows that all up out of the water. But he won't see that till he's older. Okay. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up. I appreciate you guys listening in, taking the time. Again, what? There's a manual? Yes, there is, about the government. And it's just one of those things I wish I would have known earlier in my career. But I certainly got to it by 2009 and relied on that document just to kind of see what was going on, engaging with stuff, and just realizing just how vast and complex the government is. And so when you think about how do you hold it accountable? Well, if you kind of start from where you're at and you kind of build toward it, you'll find your way. You'll find your niche. You'll find the place that like you want to make that difference. But sometimes you want to kind of take a big picture look. Like, okay, show me everything, and that's what this manual does. And then you can start to say piecing it together. And in my case, working for a congressman who served on 3 committees, having a range of oversight over different organizations, knowing how to find stuff, you can start to engage a bit further. You can start to ask deeper questions. You can demonstrate that your competence on behalf of your member, of your elected official, and showing that, we're going to take a hard look at stuff. Part of our job is to oversee, and part of our job is to ask those questions when we have meetings with folks who represent these commissions, these boards, these departments, these agencies, the executive branch, and to just have really meaningful conversation about what can be done, how can we do things better on behalf of the public. So that's why I'm excited to share this, because it's just so eye-opening to know that it's complex, but it's not unnavigable. Like, we can navigate these complex spaces, especially if we have a sense of how they're organized. So with that, I want to thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing you next time. So take care and have a great night.